Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at the game played between Anthony Kionga and Victor Ngani over the weekend. This was round 3 at the Muranga Open Chess Championship, and Anthony Kionga was playing white against Victor Ngani. So let's just dive straight into the game and see what happened. So Kionga opened with c4, employing the English opening, and now e6, knight to c3, takes, and now pawn to d4. I'm just transposing from some English opening lines back into the Queen's Gambit exchange variation, sort of. And now Victor Ngani plays pawn to c6, knight to f3, bishop to f5, bishop f4, knight to f6, pawn to e3, now pawn to h6. Just offering or preparing, this is some sort of a prophylactic move, just giving this bishop a square that he can go back to in case Kionga tries to chase it away with knight to h4. And pawn to h6 is actually a very good move in this position. Just giving some freedom to that bishop in case it's being attacked. So pawn to a bishop to d3 from Kionga, just trading the bishop instead of trying to chase it away with the knight, and takes, and now knight to h5, just taking the remaining bishop out of the game. Castles, bishop, knight takes bishop, pawn takes back, and now bishop to e7, rook e1, castles, rook to e2, preparing to double up on the e file, just putting more pressure on that bishop on e7. And now Ngani played knight to a6. Now, I didn't really understand what the purpose of this move was. Maybe throw your knight to b4, in some way develop your knight to c7, maybe. But then by developing the knight to c7, as you're going to see in this game, it's going to be really tough to place it on a very accurate square, because it's going to be pushed around a lot and it's not going to have some natural development as it could have had if it was played from b8 to d7, then to f6, and maybe at some later date throw it into e4 with the help of the rooks, maybe rook coming, both of the rooks coming to the e file, maybe being doubled up, coming to the e file, maybe being doubled up on the e file, and just putting some more effort or more support to the knight as the knight comes to e4. So this is the plan that I thought you should go for as black in this position. But again, knight to a6, it's still playable. It's not a bad move in any way. It's still playable, but it's just insane how Kionga manages to take the knight out of the game. So Kionga first plays pawn to a3, just restricting the knight from jumping to b4. And Ngani continued his plan. He played queen to d6. And now Kionga jumped with his knight to e5. Many moves are playable in this position. You can double the rooks up. You can double the rooks up from rook a to e1. You can put more pressure on the bishop. You can also play pawn to g3, much playable. You can also jump in with your knight to e5, also very playable in this position. And notice that the pawn on f5, on f4 rather, is being attacked, but it cannot be captured at the moment, because if you dare take it, your bishop on e7 will be hanging. So instead, Kionga goes for knight to e5, which will transpose to many lines, because if you play rook a to e1, maybe rook a to 8, now knight to e5, still follows some sort of a plan, or still follows the same idea that you've seen in the other position. You can't really chase the knight away, because the knight jumps in, a very huge attack on the bishop, and if you move the bishop, then the rook just the rook on e8 falls, and it's a very tricky position to play with the knight on e5. Very annoying knight to actually face in this position. So Kionga played, instead of all this, Kionga just went for knight to e5 instead immediately. And now knight to c7, rook to e1, rook e8, and now knight to a4. Maybe trying to jump into c5, trying to put on some pressure on the b7 pawn. And now Victor Ngani just played his knight to e6. And in this position, there's a very neat line by taking the pawn on f7. You might think that knight takes on a4 works, but it doesn't, because then we just capture the queen. You take our queen, we take your rook, and after you take our rook, we just take back the bishop. We actually take the bishop, not take back rather. We take the bishop, and now we have a lot of attacks. We're attacking the knight, clearly, evidently, and we're also attacking the pawn on g7. and we have a piece advantage in this position. Uh, clearly winning for sorry about that, clearly winning for white. So instead of this, what you're supposed to do in this position after knight takes on f7 is take back with the king. And now after rook takes knight, you can even take with your queen. And after rook takes back, you can take back with the king. And the position looks like uh, white is white is down a queen. I mean, black is down a queen, but it's still playable. You have two rooks for the queen and a very good bishop. This knight still has to find some, natural squares to play on. And in my opinion, you usually need two or three pieces to attack your opponent properly. And white here, after, well, maybe if you try something like knight to c5 after bishop takes, pawn takes, it's going to be really hard to play it, because then the rooks can just, hold these pawns and just play this game to a draw. So that is a line that can be played. And instead of that, Kionga just didn't go for that idea, and instead just played pawn to g3, solidifying his pawn on f4, and asking black, now throwing the ball back to black and asking him, what are you going to do in this position? What moves do you have in this position? And now Ngani played bishop to d8. My idea, or my interpretation of his idea, is that he wants to double up the rooks on the e file, and he wants the bishop out of the way, maybe bring the bishop to c7 and take control of this diagonal, even though the diagonal is just you know it's controlled very well by white. It's a weak diagonal for black, in my opinion. Or maybe he wants to play pawn to b5 and now bring the bishop to b6 and try and put pressure on this other diagonal, which looks better in my opinion. So immediately, Kionga replied with pawn to f5, the knight went to g5, and he played his knight to c5. Just jumping in with the knight, putting some pressure on the pawn on b7. Also just dominating this knight, because then the knight can't jump into e4. You can just capture it, and after you capture back with the pawn, you just take the rook. And Ngani played his rook to e7, continuing with his plan. He's planning to double up the rooks, and I'm guessing at this position he had already started feeling the pressure, because the moves that black has to play are no longer so easy. The knight on g5 is sitting on a very awkward square. It's going to be pushed out of there immediately, and you don't really have a natural square to throw it to. You have to take it to h7, then bring it back to f6, in which it could have gotten to f6 at the beginning of the game. I hope now you see clearly what I meant when I say that the knight is sitting very awkwardly on a6, because then it doesn't really have natural squares to go to, and eventually it will reach to f6, a square that it could have saved 4 or 5 moves getting to. And now Kionga played pawn to h4, pushing the knight back to h7, queen to b3, putting pressure on the b7 pawn, and now Ngani played pawn to b6, knight went back to d3, doubled up the rooks, and now knight to f4. Another playable line in this position is knight to b4, just putting immense pressure on the pawn on c6. You can't really push it, because we can just grab the knight, the other pawn in the center, and if you do something like trying to push the knight that sits on e5 away, with our knight on b4, we capture on c6, and we put some pressure on the rook, because now if you take our knight, you take your rook with check. You can capture back with whichever piece. It's very okay. You can capture it with the bishop, you can capture it with the rook if you feel like. But now after we take back in the center, your queen has to move, and we have this beautiful control of the center. We can try and open up some lines, maybe on the king side sometime. We can, with the pawn on e5 being a passed pawn, we can put a lot of pressure on this position, and it's not going to be very easy for black to kind of navigate and find a plan in this position, because then the knight on h7 is again misplaced. You don't really have beautiful squares that you can get to in maybe 1 or 2 tempi. If you need 1, 2, or 3 tempi to just develop one piece, you know that it's a bad position for yourself. So instead of all this, Kionga just played his knight to f4 instead, And now knight to f6, and he played pawn to g4. So pawn to g4 looks like, you're blundering upon in some way, or maybe it looks like, yeah, you're blundering upon, because if knight takes on g4, after knight takes back, we can always, I mean, we can always take a piece with the queen, and now we're attacking the other knight, we're attacking these rooks. You can't really defend everything in this position comfortably, because you have to move like your queen somewhere, maybe to g3, and after the queen takes and takes back, we can even win an extra rook. And we look at the position and see that it's at the brink of falling apart for white. But I think g4 is a very good move, and it's for a very specific reason. You can try and pause the video and try and calculate the position, but it wins because of a very specific idea in the position. You can try and find it. If you paused it and found it, I mean, you're good at chess, I guess. And if you didn't, the idea is after knight takes on g4, we play our queen to g3. And you might ask, what's the idea? What if we take the knight on? What if we take the knight on on e5? We can just take back, and after maybe rook takes, we can play our knight to h5. This is a mate in one threat, and we've opened up a discovery on the rook. We're going to win a piece. So Ngani saw that after queen to g3. He saw that and played knight to f6 instead. And now Kionga played his pawn to f3, just releasing the rook and bringing it to the g file, putting immense pressure on the g7 pawn. It's going to be hella scary to try and defend it. So Ngani tried pawn to c5, maybe launching some counterplay, maybe hoping to capture the pawn on d4 and then capture one of the pieces that is attacking your king. Because if you do the counting in this position, you see that black is being attacked by 1, 2, 3, potentially 4 pieces, and he's only defending the g7 square with maybe, or not the g7 square, the king side, with maybe the rook and this knight. So it's not really adequate defense in the position. And if you manage to play c5 and capture the pawn on d4 and maybe win the knight on e5, you might be starting to maybe untangle in the position. You might be starting to remove some of the attackers that are attacking your king, and you might survive. But in this position, rook to g2 is just that quick. I mean, it's like a tempi up, and you can't really hold on for much longer. Victor Ngani played knight to h5, trying to sacrifice some pieces and trying to cool down the position. But after knight takes on h5, he played pawn to g6. Kionga just went on to capture on g6, and you can't really take it to the queen. You have to take back with the pawn, and after taking back with the pawn, I think even knight takes just wins, or even queen takes wins. Everything in this position is just strong enough to win the game. Even queen to f4 after pawn takes queen to f4 is actually a very, very strong move. Just, completely shattering black's position on the king side. So instead, Victor Ngani pushed the pawn to f6, and now queen to f4 is played by Kionga. Rook to d7, just trying to hold on, sacrificing another exchange to try and hold on to the position, but from here it's just lost. Knight takes on d7, rook takes on e1 with check, king to f2, queen to e6, and now in this position there's a mate in 9, a forced mate in 9. You can try and calculate it, but even if you don't know there's a mate in 9, the position is just easy to play, and you can find all the moves. So Kionga played knight d takes on f6 with check, bishop takes, and here even queen to g8 immediately wins the game, because then the king can't really access the 7th rank. All the squares are being covered by white pieces, with the knight controlling g7 and the pawn controlling f7 and h7. So queen to g8 just wins immediately, because then if you try and play maybe queen to e8, the only move trying to save you, can always capture the bishop, then capture the queen, and the position is just lost for black. So after knight takes on f6, bishop takes on f6, knight takes on f6 again with check, king went to g7, knight to h5 back with check, king to g8, and now queen to b8 with check. And it was in this position that Victor Ngani resigned the game. So this was a game from Kionga, very beautiful, very wonderful game played by him. Um, Many people try and act like arbiters can't play chess, but this is just a beautiful game from him. So I am sorry, I had uploaded this game earlier, but then there was a problem with the sound because it got to around minute six, around there 6 minutes 23 seconds, and there was, I think, some sound was lost when I was trying to combine the audio and the video. So I've reposted it. If you had seen it the first time and you're still here the second time, thank you for that. And yeah, brilliant game from Kionga, in my opinion, and he played wonderfully in the tournament. And we're going to be looking at some of the other games that were played. And stay tuned, comment, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.